Hi, I'm Jenine Kozey, owner of Edible Landscapes, Permaculture Design and Consulting out of Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. Every year I host a number of plant walks and foraging tours, edible perennial tours, and I try to focus them around the spring, the summer, the fall, make sure that everybody understands what each one of these plants looks like through the seasons, not just when it's bearing fruit or when it's flowering. And I find that when I was walking through my valley today and I saw all the trees in the wintertime, I realized that they still have identifying characteristics even when they're covered in frost or snow that will help us to recognize what type of plants we might have or that we may have found so that we can come back the following year and perhaps pick some of their fruit. So the first plant that I came across today were the Saskatoon berries. Now, the Saskatoon berries have a quite round, somewhat serrated leaf on them, and the berries themselves, you can still see, even in the wintertime here, if we look at one of these branches, that the berries will still remain. They're really shriveled up and dark, but they come out of a central stem almost like they're spraying off of the stem. So you can see it probably better in this picture here of the ripe berries, how there's one central stem and then the berries come off in more of like a spray type pattern. And that differs from our choke cherries, where our choke cherries will look, the bark will look quite similar and the tree without leaves will look quite similar in the wintertime, except these berries come off of a central stem and then there's a bunch of stems coming off of that central stem, similar to how grapes would be positioned on a stem. And so these choke cherries, when they have leaves on them, will also have more of a lance-shaped leaf than a round one, and it has smooth edges to it. So you'll see that they will flower at similar times. They Saskatoon berries in our USDA Zone 3 climate are usually ready to pick in late June, early July, and the choke cherries are usually ready end of July or early August. Another berry that we see would be the hawthorn. There's lots of different types of hawthorns. This one in particular, I believe, is a fleshy hawthorn. Still not exactly sure on the identification of it, but they are very, very prolific. They produce tons and tons of berries. And one of the identifying characteristics of these bushes, although it's hard to see in this winter pick because it's covered all in frost, but these bushes will have really long thorns. So these thorns are very typically 2 to 3 inches long, and they are quite formidable if you try to walk through a bush full of those. So these hawthorn berries will appear a little bit shriveled in the winter, but they will remain very bright red. And the end of the blossom is slightly different than a rose hip in the sense that it's kind of more flattened off. A rose hip, if you see one in the wintertime, this blossom end here will look almost like there's still leaves kind of spraying out of it to some extent. And other than that, the differences between this and a rose bush, if you come across one, is that the rose bushes will be, the stems themselves will be covered in tiny little thorns, whereas this bush just has sporadic, really long thorns. So that's kind of how you can tell those two apart. And then we have the American licorice, and this plant here usually retains its burrs in the wintertime. So as you can see with the summer pick, all of these flowers here end up turning into burrs that are filled with seeds in the wintertime. So it's quite identifiable as well. Usually you'll find it when it sticks to your wool mittens or your toque or your socks. And then you'll notice that you've come across a little bit of it. And the last one that we're going to look at here is goldenrod. So goldenrod in this picture is a little bit difficult to see, but it's these stalks here with the dark brown leaves. that they'll typically be in a big stand like they are in the summer picture. So you'll very, very rarely ever see a goldenrod plant all by itself somewhere. They tend to like kind of moist conditions, so you'll very often find them in ditches or near the edges of marshes. These ones in particular are down by a spring-fed creek that runs through my valley. And so these plants here, they do retain their flowers in the winter. So their flowers they look quite fuzzy and they've kind of already gone to seed by the time that winter hits. So they will still have a flowery seed head on them. Their leaves usually stay on, they just droop and turn brown. But in the summer, obviously, they have these really bright yellow flowers that make them a little bit easier to see. So that's just a quick little introduction of what some of the plants of the prairies might look like in the wintertime. If you would like to learn more about the uses of these plants, please feel free to visit my website, check out my events, and stay tuned and subscribe for future videos that go into a little bit more detail. Thanks.